I'm going to go ahead and let Zach Oleksiak introduce himself. So far, this is your first Skype session. It's working pretty well. I apologize for the kind of the weird, he was looking at the back of you all and just how the screen kind of worked out. But yeah, so without any further ado, Zach, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. So my name is Zach Oleksiak. I graduated in 2011 from Augustana as a secondary education history major. And this is my 5th year teaching. I had taught for 3 years at Our Lady of Grace Catholic School in Greensboro, North Carolina. And for the past 2 years, I've been at Eastern Guilford Middle School in Gibsonville, North Carolina. And so what I wanted to talk about today are kind of the two main experiences in the first part of my career that are kind of unique, and that was teaching in private schools and then relocating outside the Midwest. I imagine, just like a lot of you guys, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I grew up in Aurora. I went to Augustana for 4 years, and during my senior year, I met the woman who is now my wife, and during senior year, she got into grad school at University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And so after senior year of Augie, I had a couple of choices and was looking at jobs and things like that, and I got offered a job at Our Lady of Grace here in Greensboro. And even though I grew up Catholic, it was never really my plan to work in a private school, but it's kind of what ended up happening, and it was a really incredible experience. So I wanted to start with that and then talk about just moving outside the Midwest. So when I applied to Our Lady of Grace, it was the only Catholic school I applied to. It was the only private school I applied to, and it just happened to be the job that I got offered. And one thing that I learned through that entire process is the importance of building relationships in the community. And whether, it's been in the public school I teach in now or at Our Lady of Grace, that's one of the lessons that I've learned throughout my career, is just how important that is. Private schools are a unique beast, and I know some people, you might have grown up and gone to them, or, had other ways that you're interested in them. But one of the takeaways I have from working in private schools when I was interviewing and going through the whole process is to kind of emphasize the connections. They wanted to know about, what I had done within the Catholic Church, being an altar server when I was a kid, and teaching confirmation and other things that I did. And so emphasizing those connections was really important. After 2 years in my working in a Catholic school, actually, my school had budget cuts a lot like a lot of the Catholic schools, and so it was uncertain whether I was going to be back for a 3rd year. And I ended up applying to another private school that had a focus in engineering. And I kind of learned that that's really important too, no matter what the private school is, to emphasize how you can connect to what their focus is. I went into the interview and kind of tried to find ways to connect their focus of engineering to history and to the study of government and social studies, and they ended up only originally planning on offering me a part-time job, and they tried to offer me a full-time job, kind of by showing those connections. I ended up going back to Our Lady of Grace for a 3rd year, and unfortunately, budget cuts again led to me being let go and going to another school. But one of the things, again, that I learned from there is just be willing to be flexible. When I taught at OLG, I taught 5 different classes. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade social studies, 6th grade literature, and 7th grade religion over my 3 years there. It was a crazy schedule. I never quite knew what I was going to be teaching or what I was going to be doing. And during most of my time there, I was the social studies department. And there wasn't a mapped out curriculum when I got there. So as a 22-year-old kid, like a lot of you guys will be when you guys graduate, I had to go and kind of map out what I thought a 3-year social studies curriculum at a middle school should be. And it was a great experience, and it's made a lot of what I do now much easier. But it's also one of those things that was kind of, there were a lot of late nights and early mornings and things like that, and I'm sure you guys are, learning that as you go through the ed program. Some of the benefits that I learned about working in a Catholic school is really the independence that I was able to have in my classroom. I wasn't held to state standards. I wasn't forced into pacing guides or things like that. I was able to really adapt my curriculum to meet the kids that I had. And that was a really wonderful experience, being able to work on that, help them work on writing and other skills that were going to translate beyond, just middle school social studies classes. Another benefit is parent support, and as you can see on my sheet, I put that as both a benefit and a drawback, because part of what made my private school experience so great working at Our Lady of Grace was the relationships I was able to build in the community and the connections I was able to make with the families, and teaching siblings and all of this stuff. But it also could be a drawback at times. I had several times where I had parents really aggressively, I don't want to say coming after me, because it wasn't like they were, trying to force me out, but, they really try to question, and when they make that financial commitment to their child's education, they do feel like there is more of a role to play for them in the school environment. And so that was a weird situation. Part of what I also learned in private schools is they operate so much differently than public schools, and so they just don't have the same rules to abide by. A good example of that is in my first year working at Our Lady of Grace, I had 3 principals. My first principal was fired on Halloween in a Halloween costume. And so she was in a bathrobe, actually. It was one of the craziest days I've had as a teacher. But given that it operates outside of any kind of oversight, they have the ability to make sort of changes like that. And as I talked about earlier, I taught 3 different subjects while I was there, even though still to this day I'm only certified to teach social studies. It was one of those things where if I wanted a job, they basically said, we need you to teach language arts. We need you to teach religion. And it was one of those things where I had to kind of figure out as I was going, okay, how do I teach 6th grade language arts, which is a scary thing, but it was a good experience, a good training to kind of, adjust to things as they're changing. Some of the drawbacks of private school, of course, is that, there are different kind of mandates on the curriculum than in a normal environment. I was required to incorporate religion into a lot of the things that I did. And that was something that I kind of struggled with. I was very involved in the Catholic Church growing up, and then as I went through school and got out of school, I wasn't really involved anymore. And so it was one of those things where I had to kind of go against some of my own personal beliefs to teach what I was supposed to teach. And there were certain times where I kind of felt a little morally compromised, if I'm being honest, just teaching things that I didn't necessarily believe in, but it was one of those things because of who I was working for. I kind of had to emphasize things that I maybe necessarily didn't believe in myself. One of the disadvantages that I found when it came time for me to leave private schools and start teaching in public schools is that a lot of times I was kind of boxed in. Like when I would be in interviews in public schools, they would really emphasize how I would deal with the transition back to public schools. Even though I had done all of my student teaching work in public schools, you know, they saw that I'd worked in private schools and specifically in a Catholic school and thought that there would be problems that I would have dealing with the transition. And so that was something that was kind of frustrating. And I know I was passed over for one job because of that reason. But of course, I did actually get into public schools 2 years ago, and I have enjoyed it a lot since I've been in there. Teaching in private schools can be a great experience. The relationships that I built while I was there, I still have. I have a student who was in the first 8th grade class I taught there, who he's going to be shadowing me in a couple of weeks for his kind of senior project. I have kids who I tutor, who I used to teach at the Catholic school, and who I've become, you know, close with their families and things like that. You know, it's nice, especially moving to a new area, which I'll transition to in a second. It was nice to kind of be a part of a community like that that really took me in and embraced me and made me feel at home, even though I was in a place where I had never been before I had moved down here. And so with that, I guess I'll kind of transition to my second topic, and probably the one that's of, I don't know, maybe more interest to some of you guys, and that's the idea of relocating outside the Midwest. So when I was going through Augustana, I never planned on leaving the Midwest. I never planned on leaving Illinois. But as I went through college, my circumstances kind of changed. I was a junior in 2009, 2010, and that's when the recession hit and my dad lost his job and my family had to move to Cleveland. And so that kind of put some distance between me and my family and made me consider whether or not I was going to stay in the Midwest. And that's when I really started to look at other options, look at other places. Of course, as I talked about in my introduction, you know, my then girlfriend, now wife, her getting into grad school in North Carolina was really what made me first consider moving to a completely different area of the country that I had never really been to before. You know, I always, when I tell our story about how we ended up down here, you know, it's just one of those crazy things that, you know, out of all the jobs I applied for, I got a job in the same city where she got into grad school. And, you know, if that doesn't happen, Lord knows where we are. But when I went to go, you know, when I got offered the job to come teach down here in North Carolina, there were a lot of things that I was just completely unaware of. And the first was that, you know, I had done all this work to become certified in the state of Illinois, and there were questions as to whether or not that was actually going to still mean anything. Luckily, with North Carolina, everything transferred. I didn't have to take any extra classes or tests. They took
Still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, we had just a quick glitch there. Hopefully we're back.
Okay. So I ended up not having to take any extra tests or things like that, but I knew that that was something that I might have to deal with. Every state is really different with their boards of education, and I've learned that you know, North Carolina is really unique because in some ways they go along with the federal government, and you know, they follow Common Core and things like that, but in other ways they do very much their own thing. Now, as a new teacher in North Carolina, I was required to go through a 3-year mentor program. Now, working in the Catholic schools, they did the mentor program a little differently. And what I didn't find out until after I left the Catholic schools is that my mentor program in the Catholic schools wouldn't transfer over to the public schools. So even though I am in my 5th year teaching, as far as the state of North Carolina is concerned, I'm still a beginning teacher. which is kind of frustrating. You know, luckily pay-wise, it's not that big of a difference, but, you know, I have to be observed more, you know, even though I have a lot more experience than some of my other colleagues. If you do get a job outside of Illinois, there are usually people within the school or the school district who will help you with that process. And I've been lucky to have people who have helped me out, and since I moved over to Guilford County Schools, to help me through that process and try to file appeals on my behalf, which unfortunately were unsuccessful, to try to get my licensure up to date. Though unfortunately I'm still in that beginning teacher program, but only have about a year left, luckily. The one piece of advice I have for that is to be patient, because it's just, you know, the system, at least here in North Carolina, is still very outdated. It's all still handled by, you know, paper and the US mail and all of that stuff. And, you know, I can send stuff in and not hear back for 3 months on whether or not something went through or not. So that part of the process can be frustrating. I'm not sure if other states have updated more since then. I'd like to hope so. One thing you have to do when you relocate outside the Midwest is you have to learn about the differences in curriculum. And Common Core has gotten rid of some of those differences, but in certain states and certain subjects, social studies in particular, you know, the Common Core isn't exactly clear. And so, you know, North Carolina can have different ways that they teach social studies than other states. And so I kind of had to learn quickly, you know, how to adjust to those. And unfortunately, in my going into my third year, they changed how 6th and 7th grade was done. For some reason, 6th and 7th grade in my first 2 years of teaching was done regionally. So 6th grade was Europe and South America, and 7th grade, excuse me, was Africa, Asia, Australia. And then into my third year, they changed it so it was world history split in half. And so even though I taught those classes for 2 years, I really had to make an adjustment as to how I was teaching. And so learning and kind of adjusting to the curriculum is something that can be a real challenge, but also, you know, if you put the time and effort in, you can figure it out quickly. Another thing is to learn how you're going to be assessed, and that's one of those things as teachers I'm sure you guys are learning more about, is so many states now have different requirements for how, as teachers, you're assessed. You know, whether it's standardized testing, observations, and how much goes into each of those. As a social studies teacher, you know, my standardized test scores aren't tied to me as much, which is a good thing. I know some of my colleagues who teach language arts and math in particular, you know, they can have performance bonuses tied to their test scores, and also, you know, the other side of that tied to their test scores. There's a teacher at my school this year who apparently, because of some number he hit with his test scores, could be getting like a $10,000 bonus for how his students performed, which is, you know, I had never heard about before, but apparently is what can happen down here. And so, you know, learn about that, because that's something that I didn't know about until a couple months ago. You know, that, you know, there are huge performance bonuses tied to what we do here in this county in particular. The other thing I put down is to kind of immerse yourself in the area, and that's something I've really enjoyed about living in Greensboro. You know, it's a really wonderful city, but it's also a city that has issues that face it. Greensboro is the main city in Guilford County, and Greensboro has a lot of wealth in the city, but also a lot of poverty. Greensboro and our kind of area here is one of the top ranked cities for hunger in the United States. And so my school, even though my school is out in Gibsonville, which is in about 10 miles outside of Greensboro, I have students that are bused from the city out to Gibsonville to go to school. It's a really frustrating thing because the students are on the bus for about 45, 50 minutes, and they drive by a number of other middle schools to come out to my middle school. And so, they have problems with, bus issues. We regularly have buses that arrive late, but also, we deal with that hunger issue. My school is a entire free breakfast and lunch school. And in the way that our school does it, we have breakfast that's served in the classroom. And so one of my responsibilities in the morning is to set out the breakfast and keep track of the kids who have it. And, we're supposed to just send it back and, any extras. And my first year, I was doing that, just following the rule. And I had a kid come up to me and ask for extras, and I didn't know what to do with that. So I was just like, well, I'm supposed to send it back. And the kid looked at me and just said, he said to me, well, I just want to make sure my sister has something to eat for dinner. And that's when it kind of hit me like, wow, this is really what's going on here. And so, little things like that, just kind of learning about the area that you live in and where your kids are coming from every day. If I had a lot of time, I could share with you just stories on both sides, because in the two schools I've worked for, I've worked at the private school with some of the most wealthy people in the city, and in the public schools, some of the poorest in the city, unfortunately. Really quick, so I have some time for some questions. Some benefits to relocating outside the Midwest. Job availability and security with Guilford County Schools in North Carolina. Since I am a certified teacher, if my school were to have to cut positions, my position is guaranteed within the county. Meaning, they guarantee me a position somewhere in Guilford County Schools. And if they can't find one for me, there is a buyout they are required to give us in our contracts, which is really nice to know, knowing that, if there's changes in school population, it's not going to be like I'm starting from square one again, that I'll have the opportunity to stay in this area. Growing markets, particularly in the southeast. Greensboro is growing at a fairly rapid rate. I believe in 1990, the population of Greensboro was about 150,000, and we are close to, if not over, 300,000 citizens, people living in Greensboro now. The city has grown rapidly, and the school district, of course, along with it. And that definitely helps with job security and the availability of schools and jobs. The cost of living is much lower down here, which is great. And of course, as I was joking around with Dr. Schroeder and Dr. Scarlett, the weather is wonderful. I was joking that we had frost this morning, and it's probably going to get up to 55 or 60 degrees. So I guess I shouldn't be complaining, knowing what an Augustana winter can be like. With that said, I put my email on there if you guys ever want to get a hold of me. I'd love to help any of you out if you're thinking about relocating, especially to North Carolina. And with that, if you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer some questions for you. But thanks for listening and coming to the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Zach. It's been fascinating. Questions for Zach? I was really, just want to say, I was really impressed to hear all the things that you've accomplished in the short time since you graduated, too. I think it's fascinating to think about how those of you who are thinking about the private school system and the opportunities there that we might not always consider. Challenges, for sure. I was also very impressed by how it seems fairly seamless the process was to getting a job in the public school system. Every state has its own requirements, and it sounds like for you it was pretty easy. How many of us here that are in the room here at Augie are considering teaching out of state? A lot of hands are going up. Do you have any particular questions, those of you who are thinking about that? What that process is like that Zach might be able to address?
I'm sorry. Do you have a question?
It's okay. You can go.
Can you see us?
This is Dr. Brackey.
Hi,
you can
Zach.
see what you can see in that.
Okay,
Oh, hi, Dr.
I don't know. It's interesting. My sister moved to Cary, North Carolina, and had an
Yep.
early childhood degree, not a teaching certificate, but was hired to teach special ed in Cary without any license or certificate, with just a general education degree in early childhood, with a 2-year understanding that she would get her special ed degree. And she had tons of job offers.
From what I understand, some of those things can be common. I know lateral entry is a big thing is a bigger thing down here, where teachers come in from other professions and start teaching. I know the process. You don't have the same security that I have as a licensed teacher. Whereas, like if my school had to cut positions, if a non-licensed teacher were cut, they wouldn't be guaranteed a position within the county like I would be. But I know there are a lot more programs like that down here for people who are transitioning from other fields or other places in the country.
Becca, did you still have a question?
I can't remember what I was going to say.
While you're thinking, anybody else think of a question they have about the process?
Oh, does he have any useful websites that he used or anything like that? 'Cause
Yeah,
I'm
so when you were
constantly
searching
Googling
for your
this
job in North Carolina, did you, were there any particular websites? Did you go to the North Carolina education site or?
NCDPI is the North Carolina site. The way North Carolina works is kind of interesting because we don't have school districts down here. It is county based, so every county has their own school system, and a lot of them, it's one of those things where you have to go to that county's individual page or individual job site, which can be kind of frustrating. That's changed since I moved down here, because when I moved down here, it used to be that was a more common thing. I know when I was looking for the Catholic school job, I literally Googled Catholic schools Greensboro and sent a resume to a principal, and I got called 3 months later. So I kind of joke sometimes that my story is a lot of it's kind of dumb luck that I ended up down here, but I'm happy about it, obviously.
Well, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to encourage anybody who does have any additional questions to send Zach an email if you don't mind. And yeah, how about a warm Augie round of applause for Zach? Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Zach. We're going to sign off here and let you get back to enjoying the beautiful North Carolina weather.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.